Good morning.
For the record, again, my name is Jeffrey Foldy, the General Counsel for the Michigan Corrections Organization, and on behalf of its President, Byron Osborne, and its entire Executive Board, as well as the 6,000 courageous men and women that secure the facilities and the state prisons within the state of Michigan, we want to thank you for our opportunity to appear before you today. I said that we are here on the behalf of 6,000 members. I wish I could have told you that we are here on the behalf of 6,800 members, because if we were here on behalf of 6,800 members, we wouldn't be here. The fact is our membership is 750 members short. It's exactly why we are here today. We've been 750 short for some years. It's reaching an increasingly dangerous level of vacancy, not just for the officers. It's dangerous for the department. It's dangerous for the prisoners. It's dangerous for every staff member that works in the prison system, and it's dangerous for the public. From our opening statement until the last word spoke at the bargaining table, the MCO had a mantra of risk, reward, and retention. It was an important aspect of our bargaining that we do something to come to the table to close these ranks and to fill them. I probably don't have to tell you that the corrections officers within the prison are the police force. And when the alarms sound, or the duress signals go off, or the screams for assistance come over the radio, it is our members that have the primary charge and duty to respond. When medical emergencies occur, and there's the call for the assistance because there's a man down, whether that is a staff member or a prisoner, it is our members who are initially responding with the automatic defibrillators. And when the prisoners who have been locked up in these prisons because they have found not fit to walk in the communities that we have been overcome and have determined that the depression is too much and decide that they want to commit suicide to dig it out, it's our members that come through the door in an attempt to save their lives. Unlike our colleagues in the communities, police officers, we don't have the luxury of responding to public service calls. We don't have the luxury of responding to traffic control points or to assist elderly people. When our members are called, ladies and gentlemen, bad things are happening all the time. And it's because of this that we're here today, because this response force is severely depleted. We have over a 10% vacancy rate, with the numbers of 50 of our officers leaving per month. Since 2012, 33% of our officers have left the ranks. It's 1/3 of our ranks have left in 6 years. Two factors, I believe, increase retention problems. First is the cumulative effect of working in a prison environment, which is injurious to our members in and of itself. Second, because of this retention problem, massive overtime, mandatory overtime, has taken hold of our officers. Both these factors are literally killing our members and your employees. As to the cumulative effect of the career behind working behind the walls, the career in and of itself imposes detrimental effects upon our employees and members. Studies and empirical evidence have shown that high rates of PTSD soak through the minds of our members equal to that of combat veterans. This PTSD contributes to to many other factors. Suicidal risk. The evidence in these studies will show that out of 100 corrections officers, five are at a high level of the possibility of suicidal risk. I know that you have read our briefs, and in our briefs we have cited that since 2016 we have lost 11 of our brothers and sisters to suicide. I want to update that. As of that writing, we have lost another on October 24th. Retired less than a year, he took his life. It also contributes to high rates of substance abuse, marital problems, and domestic violence, as well as declinations in health. With regard to mandatory overtime, 1/5 of our prisons, 1/5 of our prisons are at a critical level and are facing mandatory overtime. One of these prisons, by way of example and illustration, is Women's Huron Valley. I'm certain, or I'm hopeful, that you've all seen the Free Press article that was released, that was done on that. These women at this prison are used to working 3, 4, 5, and even 6 consecutive mandatory assignments, 16 hours per day. In some cases, ladies and gentlemen, it goes to 17 or 18 or 19 hours before they are relieved. And then when they are relieved from that assignment, they go out into the public to travel. The effects of this type of environment lead to exhaustion. They are less vigilant in a prison setting where hypervigilance is required. It slows their response time. It goes without saying that morale problems are rampant, and an increase in discipline. With all due respect, I must say that if the public suffered from these factors, if the Michigan State Police or the county sheriff or the city police department was suffering from under these types of laborious problems, there would be a public outrage in their communities. But us, we're tucked away behind walls. Our cancers are buried deep within the prison bowels, with pleas falling upon deaf ears, hopefully until today. The mandatory overtime crisis exacerbates the already existing ills associated with the job. How can this be acceptable? It's been occurring for years. How can we not immediately launch an endeavor to eradicate these factors that compound the dangers that face the corrections officers that protect the public every day, 24/7? Two factors create a stable workforce. The first is compensation, and the second is the working conditions. With regard to working conditions, let's face it, this is a prison setting. Very little can be done about the conditions in a prison. We don't have pastel walls, we're not going to have ergonomic chairs or ergonomic desks that we work at. We accept that it is a prison setting. Therefore, we're left with compensation. I'm often confronted with the argument that says, Mr. Folding, you argue safety, but yet you say money is the answer. How do you reconcile that? How does money affect the safety problem? It doesn't, to be quite frank. But there's a cost-benefit analysis. Those individuals in New York City that wash the windows in skyscrapers, that climb 60 floors, they won't do it for $10 or $15. They'll do it for $40. They'll do it for $45. It's a simple cost-benefit analysis. And I just want to be plain and blunt with you on that. The arguments distilled down with us today, after reading the briefs, I believe leave us with 3 essential facts that cannot be argued differently. Money is available. Number 2, a serious problem exists and has existed for a damn long time. And 3, to this date, the employer has just said no to our proposal. Madam Chairperson, we are widely aware of the dangers of coming to Impasse. This is not our first time. I've counseled my clients and our membership that Impasse is not where we want to be at any given time. And I'm thankful for the work that we did with the Office of the State Employer in resolving every single issue, right up until the 11th hour before we appeared here today, leaving us this one single issue. But it is this one single issue that we cannot turn a blind eye to. Our members are suffering greatly, and in suffering greatly, it's causing a dangerous impact on those parties that I told you about in my introduction. Specifically, the department itself, all staff, prisoners, and the public alike. In closing, the problem I would submit to you is so serious as we sit here today. Everyone associated with corrections, whether you're a nurse, whether you're an executive secretary, whether you're the deputy warden, whether you're the doctor, whether you're the wife of a corrections officer or the son, everyone associated with the Department of Corrections should be praying that MCO succeeds today. Thank you.
Thank you. We will have some questions. I don't know if you want to ask questions at this point or wait. You're going to have a presentation on.
He's just here to answer any
questions. All right. So this is your presentation.
This is the first.
So we are open for questions. Judge, you have questions?
Counselor, first of all, let me compliment you and the others who worked on your brief. It's very well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good piece of work. Having said that, of course, I have some questions. First, you say this problem has existed for a damn long time. How long? Where do you date this problem as beginning?
Judge, I think there's a combination of problems that I would address that question with. Number one is this. I think there's been some failed policies that have occurred over the years, both with the employer as well as with the legislature. So I would begin back in '96 when the pensions were taken away. No doubt.
Wait a minute. You say taken away. Alternative was offered, right? I mean, you switched from one type of retirement system to another.
I don't believe that's accurate, Judge. We had a defined benefit program that was set into effect, and that was removed by the legislature.
Right, and you now have a defined contribution plan.
That is correct, but I think those are wholly different in the eyes of our membership.
Well, it's wholly different in my eyes. I went from one to the other. I understand the difference, but it's not as if there is no retirement plan at the state level. There is.
There is.
It's a different type of retirement plan.
I stand corrected.
Coming back to my point, what I'm trying to establish is a beginning point, a point at which you would say, look, this is when this problem, whether we call it retention or vacancy or turnover, this is when it really began. And then I assume you're going to say from that, or you might say, or from that point, the data probably showed some ups and downs in retention or turnover or vacancy, whatever word you want to use, until today, at which point you say, now it's really too high. I looked at your exhibits, and I couldn't find one that told me what's the range here, and when do we hit a crisis point? When we say this is dangerously too high, well, okay, give me a number. Translate that into something that I can look at a chart and say, if we were to reduce this vacancy rate or retention rate by 10, 15, 20, 30%, we would then bring it down within the level of, it may not be perfect, but at least is reasonable. Is there such a document?
I believe there's such a document, and I believe it was there would be an exhibit. If I might just point to our brief at page 5, Judge, I can tell you this. One of the factors that had occurred that in 2012, under the directorship of Dan Hines, he moved the academies from a state-run academy to a college courses. During that period of time, that lasted 4 years, and during that period of time, there was a dramatic drop and a dramatic recruitment problem within the Department of Corrections. Specifically, since 2012, approximately 3,700 corrections officers have been hired. And as of the same date to present, 1,212, that's 33%, have left the corrections officers' ranks. So during that period of time, I would, in answer to your question, the best that I could do right here is point to that period of time from 2012 to 2016 when we had a dramatic drop, and we haven't been able to recover from that point since.
When you say a dramatic drop, you had a dramatic increase in turnover and in vacancies.
That's correct, Judge.
So you would say, I assume, that this problem really began to manifest itself in some date in 2012.
I think the evidence objectively would show that's when it starts to manifest itself. That's correct.
Yeah, all right, that's 6 years worth of data. I'm not a statistician, believe me.
Nor am I. That's why I have one sitting next to me.
I've done with my checkbook. It strikes me, though, that that may not be enough data. That may be too short a period. I guess we'd have to think about that a bit. But within that period, let's just use that as an example. What's the number that you consider to be the number that is unacceptable, that indicates all the problems that you mentioned either happening or are about to happen? What's the magic number? Is it 4% turnover or vacancy? Is it 12%? What's the magic number?
I do not have evidence to support this. I only know that in speaking with my colleagues that attend the ACA standards and such of that around the United States, that an acceptable number that I've come to understand is 8% to 9%, up to 11% turnover is typically, I don't know if it's acceptable, but that's typically the average number.
So that's a number that we could...
For 2012, to be quite frank. Anywhere from probably, my recollection is anywhere from 650 to 750.
Let me broaden the questions just a little bit. You might want to ask Mr. Beam on this one in particular. Again, I don't know that that's a long enough period to do what struck me as one possibility for an increase or a decrease in vacancy rates. The possibility is that if the economy is good, wages are rising, there are jobs out there, and I know there's the comparability question. Nobody works a job that's comparable to the Michigan Corrections Officer job. I accept that, I understand it. But it would strike me that during good economic times, you might see an increase in turnover, an increase in vacancy rate. because there are more opportunities available. You know, your members might decide to go work some other job for more money and less risk. Mr. Bean, is that an economic proposition that makes any sense?
Yes, it does, but a couple of clarifications there. We haven't had the kind of economic environment that we currently have for 6 or 8 years.
Right.
This is relatively new. So if there's actually been a change over time, that can be tied to the causality can be determined as good economic conditions that we want to look at. Now, if you really want to do an empirical study of this, what you have to have a longer time series.
Yeah. This is not enough time period, is it?
Probably not, but to establish too much causality. But what you also do is you look at other states, you look at their retention rates, you look at their, do a comparison with other states, and of course they may do things differently than we do, I'm sure they do. But that's the type of thing you'd have to do. So you'd have time series, you'd have a panel of data that you want to look at.
It would also strike me that if the prison population is going down, the number of beds is decreasing. That although the proportion of vacancies between the number of beds and the number of correction officers may remain roughly the same, the absolute number might go down because you have less beds. Therefore, you need less guards. You'd have probably, or perhaps, the same vacancy rate, but in absolute numbers, you would need fewer corrections officers.
Yeah, that depends on the type of prisoner you've got. You've got different levels of prisoners that need different levels of supervision, obviously.
Well, you lead me exactly to my next question, which is really directed back to Mr. Field. If, let's say you have 2 prisons. One of them is a minimum security, I don't like the term, but camp cupcake environment. And the other is a maximum security, smart camp. Wouldn't you expect to have a higher vacancy rate, a higher turnover, higher or lower retention rates in Marquette than in Camp Cupcake?
I don't know, Judge, that's accurate. You know, some decades ago there was a retention problem, and at these higher level facilities, the level 5s and the level 4s, and there was a high security premium pay that was put into effect to maintain them. But I don't know that we have any empirical data that says that there's a higher or lower retention rate in either. But I would say that in the 30 years that I've been doing this business, I've seen lots of officers get hurt at Camp Cupcake, and I've seen a number of officers that have been working in Camp Cupcake suffer from the various same things that officers do at higher level facilities.
I think you're probably right. There's no single factor that you could pull out and say that's it. Okay, we have the silver bullet here. If we could improve our physical environment to the nth degree, we would have no retention problems. That probably isn't so. If you had the most modern prison in the world, or the most enlightened administration, and the fewest number of disciplinary write-ups, if you will, against the inmates, just go through every data that you might look at, you still would have retention problems, given the nature of the work.
Certainly we will probably have retention problems, and I don't think that the objective here today, at least from MCO's standpoint, is to ameliorate retention problems altogether. Our objective is to lower those retention problems into a workable number.
And that workable level, if I'm understanding your testimony, is according to, and I didn't know the title that you gave to it, according to some standards, roughly 11%.
That's my understanding, Judge. I'm pretty certain that that information is readily handy to some certain degree, or at least to, there's some empirical evidence out there that would suggest that. My understanding in working in the field with former colleagues, that 8 to 11% typically is a retention rate which has been deemed acceptable by employers.
Retention rate or turnover rate?
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
turnover rate.
Yeah, I'm gonna say.
Turnover rate.
Yeah, okay, turnover rate. And right now, are you saying it's at 33%, or that's over the period of time? Excuse me, just following up on that.
Yes, from 2012 till the present time. Once again, the numbers were we hired 3,704 corrections officers, and to present 1,212 have left the correction officer ranks. That's 33%.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Judge?
So really, and I don't blame you for this one bit. As a matter of fact, I think it's a responsible position to take. You're not really suggesting that by adopting your proposal, we can eradicate the turnover problem. You're suggesting we could ameliorate it. My question is, how will we measure that? Is there a way in which, let's assume we accept your proposal in total or in part. Every time the state of Michigan adopts a demonstration program, I cringe, because nowhere in that program, or very rarely, do I see a mechanism for measuring success or failure. What would the mechanism be to measure success or failure?
Judge, I think in the simplest terms, and I guess it's the simplest that I can say, is that if we can orchestrate some plan to have this pilot put together. Our plan was over 3 years. We thought that that was a period of time that was sufficient to determine whether or not we can start to maintain and hold the bodies that we have right now. I think the only benchmark that I could sit here and tell you that would be effective is to see for certain that we're maintaining and holding bodies within the ranks of the corrections officers. That kind of sounds sophomoric or simple, but
no, not the least. It's one way of measuring it.
It just seems to me that would be the process. But following up on that question, Judge, might I just add that it's interesting that you bring that up, because at the negotiating table, there were no discussions about those benchmarks or how we do this. At the negotiation table, there was proposals submitted by MCO and flat rejections by the employer. Proposals submitted by MCO, flat rejections by the employer. I will tell you that in sidebar conversations, there may have been some conversation that was brought about by the union at the 11th hour that talked even as much as a sliding scale, much like they use in general contracting, whereas a general contractor signs a contract and says, if you produce this by this point and you're ahead of schedule, you get this bonus. In the reverse, the union had even talked about, here's our basic proposal. What if we talked about doing something where the department showed that they were bringing people in, they were retaining those people, and the mechanism would then have a sliding scale where the retention fees that we are asking for would then reduce. We were in conversations about that, but no proposals, no counter proposals ever came from the department. So I'm ill-equipped at this time to give any in-depth discussion about benchmarks.
Well, what I derive from the department's response is that they consider your proposal, your retention pilot, as being too expensive because, and estimate that it will cost, I don't have it right here, but some 3 times over the full payout, if you will, 3 times what the simple 2% bonus would cost. I think that their basic objection is the cost. They do say, and I agree with them, that there's got to be some performance mechanism, some mechanism to measure the performance. Otherwise, we're just putting another program into effect that becomes sort of part of the structure, and once a program is in effect, it's very hard to eliminate it.
Let me be perfectly clear, Your Honor. The Michigan Corrections Organization is not here seeking monies for persons or seeking benefits for persons just because they're on the payroll. We have an interest to have people at work. We engage in those discussions. This is not something that we're trying, this is not a mechanism in which we're trying to shrewdly get some more compensation for our employees. The bottom line here is we want bodies in that prison. We want our members to have the partner or their 2 partners next to them, not having had worked 16 or 17 hours on the shift before. So I will agree with you on this. We are not looking for somebody to receive something simply because they are on the payroll. We are here today because we want bodies inside of the prison working. And to bootstrap to that, Judge, it seems to me that when we have a problem bringing somebody in the front door and cannot keep people going out the back door, then we have to concentrate on the workforce that we have. We have to stabilize that workforce that we have so that when we bring those bodies in, which we felt over a 3-year period of time, we're talking about 750 positions. And they're having problems filling those academies at this point in time. So we need to do something to stabilize the immediate workforce that we have, and we are in total agreement that if our workforce, if members of our workforce are off on long-term leave, they're doing us no good. Now, that's not to say that they're not legitimately out there for a reason, but the fact remains as we sit here today, the principle and the principal cause of our proposal is to stabilize the immediate workforce we have until we can rehabilitate the numbers that are dwindling at this point in time. So I agree with you as well, and we agree with the state employee.
Those are my questions, Madam Chair.
All right. Mr. Rizzo, would you like to ask some questions?
I've got some questions, but I'm not sure if they're all just for you.
Yeah. Mr. Rizzo?
Yes.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but my colleague was wondering if he could address the question that was left
About the cost.
about the cost.
That's all acceptable. No, that's not.
Yes, of course.
This is just a point of clarification, Judge. The 2%, and this is from a document that comes out with every budget, where the economics and the cost of economic increases by department are given to the legislature. That way the legislature can, if they choose to, vote it down and roll the wages back to 0. But anyway, general fund cost for the 2% increase built into the 2019 budget, the entire 2% is $15.79 million. So if your supposition was that it's 3 times that, that ain't a lot of money, to be frank with you. We're already, in terms of the general fund coming out of 2018, we're already about $450 million ahead of what the estimates are. And I point out, and you actually have this in some of the documents, the on average since 2000, budget lapse has been about $133 million a year, general fund budget lapse. So it's not, it really isn't a lack of money out here.
I think you can go ahead.
I think so.
Judge, are you okay if we ask some questions over here?
Sure, absolutely.
All right, thanks.
Just a couple of quick ones, Jeff. Do you have, aside from, are you suggesting that the retention, your pilot retention program is the sole reason for your lack of ability, not yours, but the lack of ability to recruit officers?
Could you just ask me that again?
Well, what do you see as the reasons why corrections can't hire enough officers?
Well, you know, I mean, I guess I have to be brutally honest with you, and I think the judge had pointed it out, that when economic times are good and you can make a certain living doing something without dealing with high-risk felons, seems to me that people are going to go that route. So, you know, if we have a situation where economic times are inhibiting the ability to recruit, I wouldn't disagree with that. But that does not. You know, it seems to me if we had a bad economic time, if we were in bad economics right now, we still have this problem, and it is a grave problem. We're here today, and there is money, but it seems to me that the answer is, we just don't want to go that route. And for us, obviously, because we're appearing here today, it was just unacceptable. So I have to agree with the judge that if we are in good economic times and there's a better road to travel where you don't have to walk into a prison and have a gate slam behind you and deal with 1,200 people that the courts have deemed not fit to walk amongst the society you and I are, that's just the raw truth, and I can't run from that.
No, I get that, but I look at the, you know, you talk about the inside law enforcement, I look at the outside law enforcement. There's been a recruiting issue for a number of years now for law enforcement officers outside, and it's not about money. It's about today's society. You know, we have set records on the number of officers killed in the line of duty by gunshot. So I'm just trying to figure out what, you know, is it just money or what? But I do have a question that maybe you can help me with. This might be one better, more for the officer state employer. Are your officers covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act? I was looking at the survey from the Women's Correctional Facility.
They are.
And the number of hours that they worked.
Yes.
If they were covered under that, that almost seems like a violation of federal law.
There is a certain section of the Fair Labor Standards Act. I almost want to say it's Section K, but don't hold me to that.
That's okay.
That allows law enforcement, fire personnel, including corrections personnel, to be paid in a manner under a formula which is far different than what we typically see in other industries.
Okay. Well, it'll be a question then for OSE, because I think even in the state police arena, you're capped at 16 hours in a 24-hour period. And I don't think there's any exceptions to that. So you're looking at 740 vacant positions.
That's correct.
Now, is that actually 740 bodies that you're missing, or is that 740 FTEs in the budget?
That is 740 full-time positions that we are short.
Okay, is that by a budget number? How do you arrive at that 740? As an example, a little bit familiar with state budgets, but not everybody's budget. In the state budgets that I'm familiar with, there are additional FTEs placed in that budget that are never intended to be filled, so that there is extra money for overtime, some of those things that you just can't forecast. So my question, if you know, again, might be, I don't hold you at a disadvantage, might not be your answer, is that 740 actual bodies, physical human bodies that you're short, or is that 740 FTE positions within the budget that are vacant?
740 bodies.
And then, if we go back to 6 years, I'm trying to figure out where the 740 might fit into your argument. We're down, it looks like, by the numbers presented in the books, 5,000 prisoners and 629 MCOs. The prison population in 2012 was, I didn't write it down, but it's 5,000 less today than it was then. And your guard numbers are
Corrections.
Correct. Sorry. I remember Mel going through that. Professionalization. I apologize for that. And I do appreciate all the service of all the men and women here. You're down 629 corrections officers. So how does that mesh with the 740 that you're trying to get?
I guess I'm having a hard time appreciating your question.
Okay, in the Floors Exhibit number 5, it shows your correction officer count in 2012 at 6,343. And now you're down, okay, I think I just did some wrong math. That's 1,000.
1,000, almost 1,000 left now.
And then the prison population in 2012 was 43,000 and change, and today it's 38,000 and change. So what's the, is there in the contract, is there a ratio, correction officer to population?
There is not.
There is not. Okay. So there's no way to judge when the population goes down, should the number of FTEs go down? Not suggesting it should, I'm just looking for it.
I'm familiar with no benchmark that does that.
Okay.
Even like in other, I'll just say other states, are there any other benchmarks that show a ratio, like a standard ratio or anything that would be?
Not that I'm familiar with, but I can tell you that in that, I don't know if this helps the question, the way that I perceive your question is that in that period of time when the prisoner ratio had dropped, we weren't laying off corrections officers because of prison, right? Because we were still short. Those officers were they could take a voluntary layoff, but typically the majority of them, I don't even think we had very many that would take layoffs. The majority of them would relocate to prisons that had vacancies to help fill those vacancies.
And probably just reduce through attrition.
Correct.
Nothing else. So of the 1,200 that have left in the last few years, do you know how many of those were through retirements, or were all of those less than vested employees that left?
I can tell you by way of example, from September of 2017 to September of 2018, there were 613 departures. 226 resigned, 258 retired, 51 were terminated, 14 were on an expired waived rights leave of absence, and 36 were on a waived rights leave of absence. So the majority, over 500, was between resignation and retirement.
I have some questions too. Let's follow up on that exhibit that you had, Exhibit 5, with the with your count. In 2011, there were 4,240 corrections officers, and then it jumped by a couple thousand. Can you explain what happened between 11 and 12, if you know?
Between 2011 and 2012, I can tell you that we were still under the state-run corrections academies. And under the state-run corrections academies, when you hired in, much like the state police, you began getting paid. At 2012 to 2016, there was kind of a, I don't know how to call this other than a two-tier system that occurred. In the first system, you paid for your own schooling, you went to your own schooling. Once you finished the schooling, the department, as I recall, would then find out if you fit the criteria. You took the PT test and they gave you the little certificate that said you could come aboard and get hired. So the best way that I could explain that is from 2011, people coming on board were being paid immediately and were state employees. During the periods of 2012 to 2016, they were students paying for going to the academy and paying for it themselves, and then coming aboard.
So, but to me, that's sort of counterintuitive, is what I'm trying to figure out. It looks like something was put in place, or something happened, an event, that, as you've described it, it sounds like we would have fewer people employed because they wouldn't come to us when they're learning and being paid. And yet we have a jump of almost, well, maybe it's not 2,000,
Madam
but.
Chair, if I could interrupt, I believe that's the Henderson, the RUO reclassification matters reflecting that.
Oh.
Oh,
Okay.
there was that.
So these were employees, they just were reclassified.
There was that case that causes us to be at the Supreme Court today.
Okay, all right, thank you. That was like, I thought maybe there was some magic bullet in there that they were able to hire and we could look back on that practice and say, here's something that actually worked, you know?
Please don't look back on that.
Okay, all right, I got it. I have some questions that are more hypothetical for you to consider. I noticed in your statement, and I very much appreciated that, that you were open to having more ideas and discussions. That your proposal, while you want us to take that very seriously, and we do, there might be other possibilities or solutions to the problems that you're facing. So I'm going to pose some of these questions to the employer too, because the employer has acknowledged that the problem exists, and according to their statement, and that they say it's a national problem, and it seems from the research that's been provided here that this is being experienced, high vacancy, high turnover in other states around the country. But my question is, what research have you done, has the union done, or has been discussed at the bargaining table or in any forum about the best practices that other states have employed to reduce their vacancy and turnover rate? So that's question number one. What have you talked about? What ideas are working out there? What has been studied? And by way of example, just things that came to my mind, since the state has waived the initial requirement of 18, I think it was 18 hours of college credit that were upon hire, the corrections officer could get that within 18 months or something. Programs like paid college tuition reimbursement programs, recruitment bonuses that are paid out after a period of time, so that, because as I read your proposal, I didn't see anything quite in it that said if I pay this out on this date, that the person receiving it couldn't leave the very next day. And clearly, if you're trying to retain someone, you want to build in incentives that make them stay, not just for 1 year, but obviously longer if possible. So those are the kinds of things I'm just wondering about, if discussion had taken place, if you've done any research about these programs, and if so, what would be your comment on that?
I would tell you this, that prior to the bargaining session beginning, the waiver of the college credits was something that MCO approached the department with. It was MCO that spearheaded that, actually, brought it to the department, went to the training commission, had the training commission endorsed it, and then we brought it to civil service. So that is one aspect that we've attempted. In all fairness, the employer has, at Huron Valley Women's, where this crisis is the most critical, the employer came to us and asked about having a situation where we would have employees be allowed to, we call them worksite lines, for lack of better words. A prison is a work site, and a prison next door is a separate work site, and officers don't cross that for various reasons. Safety is one. But the employer came to us and asked if we would entertain the notion of allowing officers to come in and help with the mandatory overtime there from other prisons. That notion of crossing worksite lines for decades has been taboo for us. But recognizing that the women at Huron Valley were suffering so much, we did it. But I will tell you, to this day, as of yesterday, we have 2 employees that have crossed worksite lines. It's not working.
So are you open to things like other programs of retention, recruitment bonuses, retention bonuses, tuition reimbursement, you know, typical tuition reimbursement programs that employers if you pay for tuition for somebody, they gotta commit to stay, or they have to pay it back. I mean, there are disincentives for leaving. And I'm just wondering how open the union is to exploring those options.
Madam Chairperson, we are open to anything that will fill those bodies. I can tell you that our political director, Jeremy Tripp, is working on a tuition assistance program. It's in its infancy at this point, but we are working on a tuition assistance program at this very, in fact, he's already met, as I recall, he's already met with a few colleges that would conduct this training by online training. Mm-hmm. So we are engaged in that at this point in time. But I have to tell you this, and I don't mean it to be a slight against the employer, nonetheless. This bargaining session was something that I've never experienced. There was very little conversation across the table. In fact, we had made a proposal, and again, we'll admit our proposal on this programming was bare bones, but it was only to offer something for conversation. There was no conversation, there was no come-out, there was nothing. There was conversation behind closed doors about what we're really trying to achieve and where we're trying to go, and even the question came up by the Office of the State Employer, you know, what good does this do if you're paying people this incentive or this retention, but they're not at work and they're off? And we backed up and said, that's not our goal. Mm-hmm. Our goal is to put bodies next to bodies inside our prisons. We're open to those ideas. We're open to recruitment bonuses. In fact, I've had several discussions with Mages, executive director, who I know has talked to us about recruitment bonuses, but as my conversation with him yesterday, that's not going over so well with the employer, even though that there was a regulation that I understood to be wrote that allowed for us to do that, but the employer is not acting upon that. That's just a conversation that I've had. So we're open to it. We're open to anything. Our purpose here today, we resolve 99.9% of our issues right up until, in fact, I'm ashamed to tell you that, I mean, but if you read the brief right now, there's a section in the brief that talks about insurances and something else that I didn't have time to scratch out because we were negotiating right up to the day that we submitted our briefs. But you can be assured that, as I indicated to you before, this is not an interest. We are not interested in a shrewd attempt to gain something or more compensation. This is a direct attempt to get bodies and maintain bodies in the prisons to assist our membership in a very, very crisis moment.
Those are my questions. Any other questions? Judge?
It wouldn't be a difficult calculation, would it, to say, you know, at current levels, to reach below 11% turnover, we need X number of bodies. It wouldn't be hard to quantify exactly how many people you need.
It seems to me that it wouldn't be, Judge. I don't think that would be problematic.
We'll ask the employer the same question.
Here you go, Cheryl.
All right, I think those are all our questions for now. You'll have 5 minutes of rebuttal since we took a lot more of your time.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. With that, we'll hear from the Office of State Employer.
Director of the Office of the State Employer. With me today, we have Jonathan Patterson, who is the Human Resources Director of the Michigan Department of Corrections. We also have Shannon Pike, who is the Budget and Projections Division Administrator, should you have questions that are best for the department to answer. It sounds like maybe you will. MCO comes before you today requesting the panel recommend imposing a 3-year retention and professionalism pilot program on the Michigan Department of Corrections and the Department of Health and Human Services. A small portion of the MCO membership is in DHHS. We respectfully request the panel's consideration of the Department of Corrections' chosen direction to address its staffing levels and permit the department the opportunity to continue to focus on recruitment and hiring in fiscal year 2020, as well as retention at all levels, and allow time to see if MDOC's adjustments in assignment of staff are successful. One of the differences between the parties on this particular issue is, although the MCO is saying that this is outside of the 1-year reopener, I mean 1-year agreement on wages and group insurances that they did sign off on, with a reopener for fiscal years 21 and 22, even though they say that's outside of, their proposal is outside of it because they wanted to go for 3 years. From our perspective, it's wages, and we have a 1 year. So we're looking at it in terms of 1 year, not waiting 3 years necessarily to see what will happen or what won't happen with the strategies that the department has been implementing for hiring, which also address retention. The differences between the MCO proposal for the retention pilot and our proposed 2% lump sum increase for fiscal year 2020, because again, the employer's looking at the 1 year for wages, is worthy of note. The MCO proposal provides no retention payment to any new employee who is not gained status. The status is generally after 1 year of successful employment. Satisfactory service would be extended, but generally it's after 1 year. Their program starts at the 1 year level and then goes forward in 3 tiers. The OSC proposal for the 2% lump sum, and granted it is 1 year, is for everybody. Now, if you are a new employee and you have less than a full year, then you get a prorated amount, but you get something. The MCO proposal gives $750 to each employee in that first tier, which starts staff. That rule becomes effective January 1st, 2019. And yes, it did lead to interesting times at the bargaining table this time around. But the flexibility that is going to be given back to the departments and the agencies is to provide more equitable access to prime vacation time, for time off around prime holidays, and for more even distribution of overtime assignments, because those fall under the assignment of staff, which becomes a prohibited subject of bargaining under the civil service rule change effective in 2019. The rule change is seen as a positive step towards addressing recruitment and retention of the new employees. There is a new vacation book process that is going to be implemented January 1st, which will allow prime vacation time to not necessarily be taken by the most senior, as it happens for the most part now. There's also a change, I believe, coming for overtime distribution. Currently, there is the 50% rule, and I'm not very familiar with it, but it does mandate overtime for up to 50% of the lower senior if mandated overtime is occurring. MCO's proposal for their 3-year retention plan reinforces the idea that if you wait long enough, then things will get better. Because if you make it past 5 years to the second tier, well then it's $1,200, and if you make it past that second tier, then it's $1,750. So, you know, you wait and you get more. That's not a novel concept, but it reinforces some of the challenge with new employees, hiring them and retaining them. Also, this is not as proposed, a program that there's any discretion. All facilities don't experience the same pressures. All facilities don't have the same staffing challenges. And yet, all bargaining unit employees would receive this proposal. It came from MCO late in the bargaining process. There was not much, if any, discussion, and I wasn't there at the bargaining table, about alternatives, in large part because it came across as 3 years, and our focus was 1 year on wages and group insurances. We had much discussion afterward, behind closed doors. We had numerous discussions with MCO. We were unable to reach agreement on this particular issue, although we did manage to reach agreement on everything else. The Department of Corrections budget is 97.3% general fund. We have information about how the revenues are coming in for the fiscal year, and they're looking really great. Well, we're talking about a pilot that starts in fiscal year 2020 and goes forward 2 more fiscal years after that. We don't know that the revenues will continue. We all hope that that long economic expansion continues to expand. But what we also don't know is what policy decisions may be made come 2019. And we also do know some budget pressures, but we don't know all of them, because there are going to be policy changes come 2019. So MCO faults us for not bargaining creatively, and that we could have and should have come back at them with a counter proposal. Their premise was not what we were willing to agree to for a 3-year. We did offer the discussion about if you want to take the 2% lump sum and look at it differently, but they wanted the 3-year. And that's pretty much where it fell apart. We cited a concern about all employees receiving the retention bonus, even regardless of whether they were still at work or they were on a leave or anything else. But that didn't obligate us to pass a proposal because, again, we were back to, we might be able to work around something in 1 year, but not in the 3-year under these circumstances. The Department of Corrections has chosen to focus on recruitment and hiring, and they've implemented many strategies for increasing applicants and retaining staff. So I have a listing of them here. They had a focus group to, I'm sorry, not a focus group, it's a lean process. Improvement committee that focused on training and recruitment of officers. They have targeting recruiting, and that focuses recruiting in areas of need to make it easier for applicants to come in, attend the interviews, to attend the academies. They have regional interviews. They've had interviews throughout the state, including in the Upper Peninsula. They hold academies in places closer to where people are to make it easier to attend. And they've seen increased participation as a result of these strategies. They've hired an advertising agency to improve advertising to attract applicants. They're having more employees involved in actively recruiting the employees. They have wardens who, they've campaigned at local community events to recruit officers. They've gone to community college and to recruit, and high schools to recruit. They have facilities who are utilizing mentoring programs to give new staff someone to talk to. There's also a program, Effective Process Improvement Communication, a team, Effective Process Improvement and Communication, that's starting to focus on official mentoring program for staff. They have a veterans liaison that focuses on recruiting veterans. It's resulted in the increase of veteran hiring. The last few academies, about 25% of the new officers were former military. They accept now the military members' joint services transcript towards the educational requirements. We've had some discussion this morning about the change through civil service with the college referral program that allows the officers to be employed and then still have the ability to finish a obtaining their college credits. MCO was part of that decision-making. As of October 26th, the department had 2,391 applicants for corrections officers in 2018. So the interest is rising. They have a pool right now of about 500, and that's a higher number in their pool than they've had for a long time. In fiscal year 18, we hired 360 officers. They're planning to hire 730 officers in fiscal year 19, with the first class being approximately 140 to 145 officers, and that's a higher number of officers in the class than they had at all last year, in class last year. We don't support the concept of the mandatory payment over a 3-year program. We respectfully request the time to monitor the effectiveness of these strategies, and we will be back at the bargaining table in 2019.
Questions?
Well, yeah, 2 or 3. Could you turn to page 8 of your last brief? And that is the brief dated October 12th.
Yes.
On page 8, in the alternative, the employer would not object to a redistribution of the dollars that would otherwise be spent for the 2% lump sum payment in any manner the MCO may decide. That caught my eye. Suppose the MCO decides to get into the shopping center business. Are you saying that that would be perfectly okay?
No, sir. I apologize for the inartful drafting. In any manner amongst its bargaining unit employees.
Say again?
In any manner amongst its bargaining unit employees, as we had discussed, away from the bargaining table with MCO. If they wanted to do
Still don't see, you're essentially saying, we'll give you X in lump sum, and you can spend it any way you want to. I mean, that's no way to run a railroad, is it? You don't want the union determining what expenditures the department is going to make. I really don't understand that at all.
Having been part of the conversations with MCO about what alternatives there may be available for that same amount of money of the 2% lump sum, which is if they thought a tiered system such as what they were proposing might work better than the 2% lump sum, that's what we had discussed with them as a possibility, but it was only on a 1-year basis, and again, it was to go to the employees if they wanted to handle it as similar to what they did with their retention proposal.
Well, look, I used to be in the federal government. There was something called the Baker Act. And the Baker Act said you had to expend money along the lines of its appropriation. And if you didn't, that was a crime. It seems to me there's no limit, at least according to that sentence, in what the union could decide to use this money for, including any limits that might be contained in the appropriation legislation. I suggest, without belaboring the point, that you may wish to check with your counsel on this one, because I really don't see how you could do it the way it's written here. So, not to belabor the point, you mentioned, and I think in good faith and accurately, that the department is increasingly targeted its recruitment efforts to recruit more potential corrections officers. But it seems to me that your employees are raising a different question. I don't think they put it as bluntly as I'm about to, but they are saying, in essence, they don't speak to to recruitment very much. But you can recruit all you want, but if in the 3 years following hiring of a correction officer, you're losing a third of them, essentially you're spinning your wheels. Unless you're willing to take a 33% turnover within 3 years of hiring, which seems to be what the union is saying, it strikes me that the union has raised a legitimate problem. And that is, during that 3 years, I understand what they're saying, you lose a third of the people you just went out and hired. Am I accurate in that?
We have various sets of numbers, sir, and part of what MCO brought forward are numbers that we shared with them. I don't have that right in front of me, and I will look for it. But sometimes what happens is people are not the right fit for the job, or the job is not the right fit for them. And so the retention information that MCO shared with you, Mr. Foldy shared about those who retire, those who resign, those who depart in any given year, goes to that. But we do have some information about departures within the newly or more newly hired employees. And some of them, I'll have to double check the number, but it was in the first 10 days. So, you know, the determination was made, I'm sure, that this was not for the job for them. And no, that's not the way we want to be handling our hiring. But there's also the recruitment element of once you get into the program, you go through the academy, you start working at the facility. And so when we say hiring and recruitment and retention, we're looking at it from day one going forward on the retention part of it.
Well, I understand that, but taking the problem that you raised, which is someone is hired on day one, and by 10 days later, he or she has figured out this is not for me. Well, okay, I suggest that that's a commonplace occurrence across job categories, maybe accentuated somewhat once the person gets inside the prison and realizes just how tough this job is, and it's very, very tough. But I doubt that accounts for a significant piece of that 33% turnover. It seems to me what your employees are saying is we're losing a third of the people that come in the door within 3 years of their hiring, and there's something wrong here. We're at a point, seems to me they're saying, where you've got an 11% turnover ratio or vacancy rate, however you define it, which is below or rather above a set of national standards. Now, under those circumstances, it strikes me that while their proposal may not be perfect or even acceptable to OSC or to the board, they are at least legitimately identifying a problem that the employer, not so much the Office of State Employee, but the Department of Corrections, needs to pay a considerable amount of attention to. I note on the positive side that on the previous page, you say, the MCO asked the panel to order the parties back to the bargaining table and to create a pilot for the same purpose of the CORP, C-O-R-P-P. I don't know what that means, so I'm just going to skip over that. Implying that they would be agreeable to injecting eligibility requirements and limitations into the pilot. Okay, let's assume that implication is correct. The employer asserts that the MCO has had ample opportunity to revise and propose a pilot more aligned with the economic limitations discussed at the table. two sentences seem to me to be in conflict. On the one hand, you're saying, well, it may be that they're willing to accept eligibility requirements and limitations, which I think would be perfectly appropriate. But on the other hand, we've already had ample opportunity to bargain. Well, which is it?
We did not receive any other variation of MCO's proposal. It came to us late. There was limited discussion at the table that was so focused around the fact that we were offering a 1 year on wages. They were offering a 3-year pilot program that looked like wages to us. So there was.
Well, it was. I don't think you can question about that. It's dollars in employees' pockets.
Yes. And the ample
It's a
opportunity.
wage proposal, no question about it. It's a pilot, but it's still a wage proposal.
Yes. And our concern is, in part, we have a reopener in 2019. The wages that we did have agreement with MCO on as the 2% increase in the base rate for fiscal year 2020 is a 1-year agreement. We will be back at the table.
So you're saying we should just wait a year? Suppose the data suggests to us that, at least within this period, and I think the period's open to discussion, they're saying from 2012 through today's date, that the Department of Corrections has never achieved a turnover ratio or vacancy rate which is at or above national standards. Well, if that's so, do you really want to wait a year?
Well, as far as like the vacancy rate and the turnover rate, I'd have to get that information. Those numbers that were indicated by Mr. Foldy, I don't know if are 100% accurate. The one thing I will
Well, they either are or they aren't. I mean, you should be prepared to say, no, that's not right. I mean, you keep track of these things, don't you?
The turnover rate?
What?
The 2013.
Well, he said 2012. So, I mean, you're almost in agreement as to when this situation began and that it has continued for at least 5 and perhaps 6 years.
There was some issues with the college program that started back under the previous administration where employees were required to obtain their college education and their training at about $4,000 to $5,000 cost before they could start with the department. We have since changed that back and we have seen growth.
But when did you change it?
We changed that back in 2015, but it's taken some time through recruitment to build up those numbers. Like we said, our academies are now getting bigger. Our numbers in the applicant pool are larger than they have been in past years. And
well, that's great. That's unqualified success. But if you lose 1/3 of them within 3 years of their coming into employment, you're almost at a wash, aren't you?
Yeah, but we're losing, some of that is they're coming into employment. A lot of what we're losing is due to the large prison expansion back about 25 to 30 years ago. We're losing a decent amount of officers through retirements as well as promotions. And in other categories beyond just corrections officers that are part of their bargaining unit, we don't experience any type of retention or recruitment.
Okay, I accept that. I thought, listening to the testimony, that going from 2012 to 2018 might be too short a period. And because simply you'd like a longer longitudinal line, if that's the correct term. But it strikes me that you have the data in hand, and with, I hope, very little tweaking, you can take these numbers back as far as you want to and see if there's a correlation between economic conditions, which I suggest. I don't know if it would be determinative, but I'm certain it would probably be, at least in part, a factor. My point, though, is that I keep hammering on it. MCO has offered a solution in a procedural solution, and that this board could order the parties back to the table. I don't think a proposal to MCO that they just take the amount of the second year bonus and spend it any way they want to. I doubt that this board or Civil Service Commission or its lawyers would view that with any great approval. So, frankly, I think maybe I would just let that one go as a fig leaf that got thrown in and probably shouldn't have been. But listen, these folks have outlined a serious problem for you, and they proposed a solution. Then they said they were agreeable to modifications of that solution, particularly with respect to eligibility requirements and limitations. Now, the piece they don't mention, and the piece that you all, to your credit, have mentioned, and which I fully agree, is it is without an evaluation mechanism, without a definition of what consists of failure, or what failure consists of, and what success consists of, you're simply spending money premised on speculation. The speculation being that if you increase pay by this amount over these 3 years, you're going to get a reduction in turnover. At the very least, there ought to be a mechanism built in that measures accurately whether or not that happens. And if it doesn't happen, well, as Mr. Bean pointed out, this won't break the budget. Nobody likes to waste money, but at least you'll know that you've tried something, it didn't work according to agreed upon measurements. If it does work, well then, the whole spectrum's open up. I doubt, though, that one of those spectrums is, and the point's well taken, I mean, a modern correctional facility is a much better place to work than one of these, than Marquette. Not to pick Marquette out, but it's an old structure, and it's cold. Clearly, the working conditions in the two institutions are different. I don't know, though, how you could adopt a pay plan that pays employees differentially based on the location of their workplace. There have been some variations on that theme over the years, but as a basic principle, I think the Civil Service Commission has taken the position that you can't, across the board, make pay decisions based on work locations, that you just get into a host of problems. I'm not asking you to respond immediately, that would be unfair. I am suggesting that you may want to take another look at the MCO's proposal to go back to bargaining on this particular issue. Those are my questions.
All right, thank you.
Just a couple easy ones. How many vacancies do you currently have? What's your number?
As of September, at the end of September, so we look at October numbers, it was, I think it was 730, it's right in here.
Okay. I can appreciate the changes to vacation picks and all that kind of stuff, but when you've already got an overworked staff, does that really make any sense? Because if you let more people off at good times, you've still got a backfill. And it appears you've already got an overstressed crew. How does that?
Yeah, I think what Cheryl was trying to say, and what the Office of State Employer is trying to say, is that we believe that we're enacting some strategies that will help with not only recruitment, but also retention. And it's not letting more staff off, it's making it more equitable. what we've kind of experienced in some of our exit interviews and talking to staff is, especially new staff that are coming into the workforce now, is that they're big into work-life balance. And some of the things is being able to have time off during what is considered prime vacation time, during holidays, during the summer months, spring break. With the changes in the rules, where vacation scheduling has come out of the collective bargaining agreement, we're able to spread out that time. So it's not that we're letting more off, it's that we're spreading it across the bargaining units more, the bargaining unit membership more. And so that some of those newer employees that have left historically in the last few years, some because maybe the economy, it has been mentioned earlier that the economy is better and so there's more options for them to go to. But also too, I can't get off anytime during the summer until I'm working as a corrections officer 5, 6, 7 years. I can't spend any time with my kids during Christmas, Thanksgiving until 5 or 6, 7 years when my seniority has increased. So we're enacting a vacation scheduling pick process now that we have the ability to do it as the employer, that will spread that equity amongst, it still recognizes seniority, but the most senior employees can't just, for lack of a better word, snatch up all of the good time and leave hardly anything for the less senior employees. And the same thing that was mentioned for overtime. Previously, the process was, there was negotiated language that the mandatory overtime was the lower 50% of seniority was subject to all of the mandatory overtime. If you were in the upper 50%, you were exempt. And so those are the things that we believe with some of these changes will help not only recruit, bring people in, but also retain those who we have. So we're asking for that opportunity to see if our recruitment efforts, we were set back by that. It was a failed proposal, for lack of, I'll just say it was a failed process by the previous administration to have employees pay for their training and schooling before they actually came to us. We're now, well, I think what I was saying is, just kind of finishing up saying is that, so, you know, I think one of the things that Mr. Foley indicated was 1/5 of our facilities are at critical staffing levels. So 4/5 of our facilities, we have, I would say, sufficient staffing. I mean, we have facilities like Muskegon Correctional Facility have no vacancies. And there are several facilities that are in single digits of vacancies. So they're not doing bad as far as like staffing. And there are several hundred members and other classifications like this corrections transportation officers and the corrections security rep, corrections resident reps that are part of their membership that we don't experience any type of retention or recruitment problems in. So just to say that I think that we are employing some other strategies that will assist in both. And they had testimonials from Women's Huron Valley, and it's one of the facilities, and I think it's the only facility that's usually singled out in their brief as to having a staffing problem. Well, just as they had testimonials to the negative, we just recently received an email from an officer because we have decreased our vacancies at Women's Huron Valley significantly over the past few months from that targeted recruiting, from that targeted academies, where we hold the academies right down in Washtenaw County, where they used to always be here in Lansing. And so it required employees to travel back and forth on a daily basis or stay here in Lansing. Well, now we do the academies right there, and the vacancies have decreased greatly, where one of the employees sent to our director unsolicited of how happy she was that the board had brought in new staff, decreased vacancies, decreased the mandates, and that now she hardly works any mandatory overtime. So I think that there are things that we are doing, like I said, not only to increase recruitment, but those recruitment strategies will then lead to more retention. Employees do leave because they may get burned out. And if we can bring in more, then we believe we'll have less going out the door.
Sticking with that facility, you heard and I don't know who wants to tackle this, the Fair Labor Standards question. How is that working with what it appears in the surveys answered by the corrections officers there, that they're working possibly well over 16 hours in a 24-hour period, and sometimes day after day. So is that Is there an exception for MCOs to go outside those numbers?
There is language in the collective bargaining agreement, and my understanding is it's a function of collective bargaining. If there is a limitation, we will research that under the FLSA. I'm not aware, but it doesn't mean it's not there, that the Fair Labor Standards Act addresses the number of hours as opposed to when the overtime pay kicks in for those who are eligible.
It wasn't so much a factor of the overtime, it was a number of hours in a 24-hour period.
Correct.
Yeah. That really becomes a safety issue.
Yeah, and we will research that. Same thing, I'm not aware of that being a violation.
But I don't know if there was an exception for corrections. I know in the state police, 16 hours was capped. You couldn't go over it.
Any more questions?
I mentioned.
I think most of my questions have been covered. I just want to clarify something. No, it's more between two exhibits from the state employer. You have exhibit number 2 is the cost of the union's proposal for the pilot. You got that in front of you? So the question is, before you get to the 3 years, the total cost is $12 million per year, essentially, right? Is that what that says?
Approximately.
Approximately, and then the total cost of your lump sum is $10.4 million, is that correct?
Correct.
I have no further questions. We have about 5 minutes for a response from MCO that they reserved, and then we'll break for lunch.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I just want to make 3 quick points within a 1 minute and then round this off the last few minutes that I have. First and foremost, the state employer made mention that they thought that these rule changes that have come out are seen as a positive step towards the employees. The rule changes have taken effect, and I mean this by no disrespect. I mean it as just a matter of fact. The rule changes that have taken place have stripped 50 years of bargaining rights from our contract. I hope you will trust me that this is not a positive step in the eyes of our members. Secondly, the employer again pointed out that the retention offer that we had made, proposal that we had made, that they did not receive any other proposal and that it came late in the game. We would have bargained until yesterday. We received nothing on paper from the employer on that. MCO never received any counteroffer in any aspect whatsoever. So I just want to make those 2 points. Finally, the only thing that I would say is this, or the wrap up is this. I woke up on the morning of October 27th, which was a Saturday, and I was thinking desperately what I wanted to say to this panel. I was lost for words, to be quite frank, because it seems to me that this is all boiled down to about dollars and cents. There's money out there, we have a problem, and the people that are holding the purse strings do not want to give it to us to help us resolve that for their reasons. I appreciate that. I do first thing in the morning, and I went to that dreaded Facebook, and there was a post from a Lieutenant Brian Hughes on October 27, 2018, and I read that. I immediately contacted Mr. Hughes, and I asked him if he would consider allowing me to read this into the record. And he said, sure. And I'd like to take the opportunity to do that, just to paint a picture from a supervisor, somebody that is outside of our bargaining unit, and paint another picture. If I might approach, I have copies for you, and I also have a copy for the employer as well.
Is the
Judge, I
supervisor within the department?
Pardon me?
The supervisor
He
within the
is, a
department?
lieutenant. Judge, I apologize, I in fact went down to you, but I'll try and speak clearly. This will be a long post, but I'm going to do something most correctional staff don't do enough, and that's open up. I broke down today. I cried. I don't break often and never talk about it or do it in front of anyone else. At first, I couldn't comprehend another coworker's suicide. Then I got to thinking about our lives. We as correctional staff suffer in silence. Some of us deal with the daily stress better than others. Some of us can't cope at all. Some of us have seen horrendous things that people should never witness and things we will never forget. Some of us have even had to do things that haunt the shit out of us daily and are the things nightmares are made of. These demons are very real, and the more I think about them, the more they scare me. When we are working in the moment, it just turns into our daily grind. It sadly becomes our normal. But when we retire or let those things creep in our minds, things change. When we go from working every day to retired, we have to face those demons that we spent 20, 25, or 30 years burying daily. I can say the last 4 to 5 suicides have been great officers and amazing people that no one would imagine in 100 years that they would ever do this. That is the thought that haunts me. Demons are real and we can't escape them. These last several suicides were people that would have never taken their own lives. That tells me these demons are stronger than we realize, and it can take us over on any given day. I used to say I would never commit suicide. Now I wonder if those demons will catch me one day. I have many correctional demons that haunt me and bring me to tears when I even give them a second thought. I guarantee that these men never thought that they would succumb to suicide either. We suffer in silence and don't share these things with our families because we never want to expose our loved ones to the things that torture us. We work in such a negative atmosphere. We work in the only profession where our own co-workers will talk shit about us if we save a prisoner's life. They will literally talk shit because you did your job and saved another human life. I can say I'm guilty of that myself, and I've been on the receiving side. I guarantee some of my co-workers will talk shit about me for making this post, but I don't care. I'm speaking the truth. I'm speaking the raw truth. Many of us will take things to the grave without ever speaking of them again. Stress also lowers our immune system, causing many premature physical illnesses that take so many lives of correctional staff. So I used to wonder why these great, amazing people never reached out to anyone, even one of us that understand the struggle. But again, I totally understand. We are trained to be non-human and emotionless. We are weak if we show any emotion, so we compartmentalize these demons. We stay silent and fight the demons in our head. I have a love and respect for the people I have worked with, past and present. I hope this will be the last suicide we have, knowing damn well there will be more. I have been doing this job for 23 years, and every day, my wife will ask me how my day was. Every day for almost 23 years, my response is, quote, just another day. I say this to my wife rather than it was just another day, or I just seen a prisoner stabbed in the neck on 2nd Gallery of 12 Block and died choking on his own blood. Or while doing CPR on a probationary officer that just fell out because of a heart attack with prisoners around screaming, quote, die motherfucker, die bitch, knowing these were the last words this officer heard as he died. The demons are real, and although I'm here right now, I'm asking you to reach out for help if you are battling these demons. I know that I would probably never ask for help either. That's why I say we suffer in silence. That's what we do. We just deal with it. I'm here for anyone that ever needs to vent or talk about their demons, corrections or not. To hell with religious beliefs, to hell with sports rivalries, and to hell with political differences. I'm here for you. For those of you that continue to suffer in silence, just know you are never alone in your battle. I know it feels lonely, but we're all dealing with our own battles right with you. Rest easy, Scotty Warner. Scotty Warner killed himself a couple days before this post. Sorry for such a long post. Thank you, he says to his wife, for always being here with me. Whether I shared my demons or he just hugged me while I struggled in my own head. Madam Chairperson, Judge Whitbeck, Mr. Weesaw, the time is now. Not 5 minutes from now. Not 5 hours from now, not 5 days. Certainly not 5 months, and certainly not a year. The time is now. We're asking for your help. Thank you.